struggling to put food on the table and to buy medicine, pay rent and mortgages, clothe their children. We have all told our stories on the floor of the Senate during 2020 about constituents waiting in food lines, hurting for the funds needed to stay in their homes or apartment and to pay for the medicine that is literally a matter of life and death. We've told those stories. We've talked about Americans who are struggling. We have the opportunity now to do something about it. And so I appeal to my Republican colleagues very bluntly and simply, give us a vote on the Cash Act. Let us vote on a standalone $2,000 stimulus payment bill. Allow every one of us to go on record on that $2,000 stimulus payment bill that would add $1,400 to the $600 already provided. Not to minimize the importance of the $600, but it is inadequate. It is insufficient. It is unacceptable because it fails to provide the basic need to meet the desperate and dire straits of so many Americans. We're talking about families that need that money to buy bread and milk, paper towels and toilet paper, goods and services that are necessary to the survival of their families. $600 is simply not enough. And that is why I call on my fellow colleagues to persuade their leader that we should be permitted this vote, because I believe that if there's a vote, it will pass. Having spoken to Republican colleagues here, I have no doubt, none, that that standalone $2,000 stimulus payment measure, the Cash Act, would pass overwhelmingly, just as did the $600 payment as part of a larger bill. And the simple fact is that measure is the only viable vehicle. Any other measure loaded with other provisions, whether it's the Section 230 reform or a commission to investigate the last election on fictitious fraud, is doomed. It is doomed logistically. It is doomed legally and physically. There is no way for the House to pass it. Only the House bill, if passed, can provide Americans with the $2,000 stimulus payment that they so desperately need. Only the House bill provides that relief. Any other measure will be doomed because the House cannot come back to pass it in the time that we have left in this session. And so the majority leader is essentially blocking a step that will literally save lives, supported by the vast majority of the American people, a significant part of his own conference, and every Democrat. And have no doubt, every Democrat will vote for it. We've clamored for it. A higher stimulus payment for months when the majority leader refused to come to the table. And then when the President of the United States failed to lift a finger, he was on the golf course, when it might have made a difference in raising that $600 amount higher during the negotiation. But looking forward, there's a way to provide this relief to Americans without leaving here in a contest of blame, but in a new year of mutual congratulation. Pass the $2,000 stimulus payment plan as a standalone, clean bill. Now, I just want to say, I'm probably the only senator who has supported two measures. One of them actually passed by the Congress and signed by the President to reform Section 230, and the other unanimously voted out of the Judiciary Committee. They reform Section 230, and I support reforming Section 230. I have hardly been uncritical of Section 230, and there should be major reform of Section 230, but it has to be done in a careful, deliberate, and considered way as a separate measure, not as a meat axe in a totally unrelated bill, the $2,000 payment bill that provides real relief to Americans. Loading the Cash Act with poison pills is obstruction. It is not constructive legislating, and it fails to meet the test of this moment. It is vital that we move forward to provide struggling Americans with this relief, and scuttling the $2,000 stimulus payment bill with a half-baked meat act evisceration of Section 230 is cruel and downright stupid. It betrays the mission and obligation that we have in these waning days of 2020. Americans need more help, and they need hope. Help and hope are embodied in the vaccine. Unfortunately, the rollout of this vaccine, despite the $8 billion contained in the latest pandemic relief bill, has been hopelessly behind schedule. The number of doses distributed is roughly a tenth of what it should be, even under the scaled-back schedule that this administration has adopted. 20 million vaccinations were promised by the end of the year. That number was way below the initial promise, and only a tenth of them, probably about 2 million, will be actually provided. Instead of taking responsibility or taking control, President Trump is still tweeting. Instead of action, more talk. Only action will save lives. And either he doesn't care enough, or he doesn't really see what is necessary to do in order to save these lives. Because the distribution of this vaccine is a matter of life and death. And so, using the Defense Production Act, mobilizing America, making sure states have the resources they need, providing money to hospitals, and making sure there are the vials, syringes, training for workers, as well as the facilities to transport, store, and distribute this vaccine are essential now. They are missing at this moment, and the president is where the buck stops. Now, I look forward to a 2021 when a new president will expand the stimulus payments to individuals, and when many of the other gaps left unfinished action that still is necessary will be fulfilled by another, more robust, bigger, bolder pandemic relief program. I hope we'll have the same bipartisan support that we saw at the end of this year for the latest. I hope we will overcome the divisions that have prevented us from doing what is really necessary and adding $1,400 to the $600 already provided. We need to do more for small businesses. Yes, there will be another round of PPP payments, but this chasm faced by restaurants, retailers, small businesses struggling to keep their doors open, keep their people on payroll during the holiday. We've seen them all and talked to them. Their stories are riveting and heartbreaking. Business people who have poured their souls and hearts and lives into these businesses only to see them threatened with extinction. And this crisis has a racial justice aspect that cannot be ignored, because disproportionately the businesses that have failed are Black and brown owned. Disproportionately, the lives lost have been in Black and brown communities. Disproportionately, the jobs lost have been in those same communities, Black and brown communities that have suffered more than any other as a result of this pandemic. And so we need to make sure that they receive the vaccines as well as therapeutics and testing that is necessary to save lives. We are in the midst of a racial justice movement. It affects policing and criminal justice, but it also affects our schools, where the zip code of a child's residence can mean the difference between quality education or not, where Black and brown communities suffer twice or 3 times the death rate of others as a result of this pandemic, where job discrimination still exists, and in housing, redlining still afflicts these communities, and where environmental quality, rivers, lakes, air, still can be disproportionately contaminated and polluted in communities inhabited by Black and brown people. We are here in the last day of an unprecedented and catastrophic year. More than 342,000 of our fellow Americans are dead as a result of this insidious virus. Over 342,000 gifts unwrapped, places at tables left open, and many of them without final goodbyes. This past year will go down as one of the hardest in our history. I think we all hope for a better year, but it will come only if we take the kind of action that apparently my Republican colleagues are failing to provide today, which is to meet the needs, to match the moment of these desperate and dire straits of so many Americans. The failure to approve an additional $1,400 and pass the Cash Act is a haunting omission. And my hope is that the hopes of a hurting nation will be met in this new year, that the calls for justice and relief will be heard, and that the ailing and sick not just physically, but emotionally, will be met. This crisis has been one of physical health care, but also mental health care. And the emotional strains can be seen in the rising rates of domestic violence, substance abuse, disorder and addiction, and so many other areas where mental and emotional stress and anxiety have taken a toll. The hopes of a fearful and grieving nation rest on our shoulders, and we cannot let them down. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I stand today to honor my friend Gary Herbert, governor of the state of Utah for the last 12 years, who after a long career in public service is now embarking on a really well-deserved, hard-earned retirement. He's served in the state of Utah and done so with great enthusiasm and dedication and spirit. And I'm grateful to have worked alongside him throughout his tenure serving our great state. Gary Herbert was born in American Fork, Utah, and grew up in Orem. He served a 2-year mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on the East Coast, and later attended Brigham Young University, my alma mater. He first began his public service in college, serving in the Utah Army National Guard for 6 years, and eventually becoming a staff sergeant. After his time in the National Guard, he set up a real estate firm and was very successful, eventually becoming the president of the Utah Association of Realtors. Also served as president of the Utah Association of Counties, by the way. Starting in 1990, he served as a commissioner on the Utah County Commission. He served there for 14 years, and it was at that point that he began his statewide service within Utah. You see, in 2004, when Jon Huntsman ran for the governor's seat, Gary became his running mate, running alongside Huntsman as his lieutenant governor, with the pair going on to win the race in November. It was then that I first got to know Gary Herbert personally, when I was hired to be Governor Huntsman's general counsel. One of my first memories of Gary Herbert, which to me seems like it was just day before yesterday, occurred when we all began moving into the governor's office suite, just the day before Herbert and Huntsman were sworn into office. Gary came in and provided us all with a warm welcome. But he didn't stop at the welcome. He offered really sound and heartfelt advice about the importance of staying grounded as we were entering the political fray. He explained that long after our service in the Huntsman-Herbert administration had expired, we'd want to be able to look back and be pleased about the relationships that we had formed with each other, but especially the relationships that we had maintained with our families, our children, and God. I soon learned that Governor Herbert, in addition to being wise, and in addition to being a skilled and valuable statesman, was also a formidable athlete. Right after he and Governor Huntsman were sworn in, the staff got together as a team several times in the governor's mansion, where we soon discovered there was a ping pong table in the basement. I then learned the hard way that Governor Herbert's athletic skills, including his ping pong skills, are off the charts. While serving Governor Huntsman, I always found Gary to be friendly, approachable, and always willing to tackle every single assignment with eagerness and poise. Whenever Governor Huntsman's schedule became chaotic or would change unexpectedly, as happens in any governor's office or any senator's office, for that matter, particularly at certain times of year. Lieutenant Governor Herbert would routinely be dispatched to speak on Huntsman's behalf, often sending him to remote corners of the state and often at really inconvenient times. He never once complained, and he was not only willing, but he was always eager and happy. He felt fortunate for the opportunity to help. That's the kind of enthusiasm that the people of the state of Utah have benefited from for so long as a result of Gary Herbert's service. You see, he's never lost that. Not during his entire time as lieutenant governor, not during his entire time as governor. You can tell that he is exactly where he wants to be and that he feels privileged and even blessed to be able to serve the people of Utah. Likewise, whenever there was an issue that needed to be addressed by the governor, even within the office or on the Capitol compound, but where the governor was unable to meet with the particular group in question, Gary was always assigned to the case. He would meet with, as he described it, all the different stakeholders. He'd get together the legislators, the county commissioners, the citizens from this or that part of the state, lobbyists, lawyers who may have been involved, in addition to other members of Governor Huntsman's administration. He'd bring them all in together, and he'd wade through all the intricate and often pedestrian details of the matter. You see, he wanted to get to the bottom of the issue. He wanted to understand it. What's more, he had the skill of figuring out the best path forward for all parties involved and for making everyone feel heard and understood. If ever, whenever there was a way to achieve a win-win, Gary found it, and he brought people to it, and they were always grateful as a result. The same traits that I saw in him as lieutenant governor would go on to make him an effective and beloved governor himself. In office now as governor since 2009, Gary Herbert is currently the nation's longest-serving governor. And our state has seen exciting achievement and tremendous prosperity with Governor Herbert at the helm. In the last 8 years, Utah has seen continued steady growth in our economy, with improvement in our GDP, number of jobs, and unemployment rate. We've seen the boom of Silicon Slopes. We celebrated the centennial, the sesquicentennial of the driving of the Golden Spike, when it was an honor to stand alongside Governor and Mrs. Herbert at that celebratory reenactment. On that particular occasion, Governor Herbert and his wife Jeanette showed their characteristic enthusiasm by arriving in their finest 1869 apparel, just to recommemorate the moment. And it made all the difference. It made it all feel much more authentic. And so too was it an honor to join Gary when President Trump came to Utah to announce his decision to shrink the Bears Ears National Monument, when we could all stand together and celebrate the fact that someone in Washington had heard our concerns within the state and saw fit to redraw the boundaries in a manner more compatible with local interests and concerns. Through his enthusiasm and his zeal, Gary Herbert has championed our state and the things that we stand for. He's done so very consistently, very enthusiastically. He can rattle off figures and metrics about Utah at the drop of a hat. I'm convinced the man can do it in his sleep and do so infectiously and persuasively. And he's a compelling spokesman for our state's values. His spirit has helped Utah to attract talent and investment, not only from throughout the United States, but from throughout the world, and to make it the good place that it is to live. Not only that, but Gary has been an instrumental partner in supporting initiatives that reflect and strengthen the values of our state. To champion the reclamation of our lands, he signed into law the Utah Transfer of Public Lands Act. He also signed into law innovative criminal justice reforms in Utah. He was at the cutting edge of that movement, making a far-reaching impact across our state and that ended up having impacts elsewhere. In fact, his work in Utah on criminal justice reform helped pave the way for the work that Congress and President Trump were able to achieve at the federal level through the passage of the First Step Act. He's been a strong supporter of Utah's family culture and was helpful in the Senate's work promoting the child tax credit during our tax reform discussions just 3 years ago. And on a more personal note, Gary Herbert also had the wisdom to put my brother, Tom, on the Utah Supreme Court. In so doing, he's been a champion for textualism, the notion that judges are there to interpret the law based on what the law says, rather than on the basis of what it might have said. For all of his public achievements, Gary is perhaps most proud and always most conscious of and most aware of and most concerned about his own role as a husband, as a father, and as a grandfather. Gary and his wife, Jeanette, have 6 children together, as well as 16 grandchildren, and he's known to encourage them to follow in his footsteps and marry up. In myriad ways, Governor Herbert has been a champion and a spokesman for all that is good about our state. It's been an honor to serve the people of Utah with him, and I wish Governor Herbert and his wife Jeanette all the best as they embark on the next chapter of their lives together. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
Majority Leader.
As if in executive session, I ask unanimous consent that with respect to the Soskin nomination, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate be in a period of morning business. The senators should be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 4044, which was received from the House.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 4044, an act to amend the Federal Water Pollution Control Act to reauthorize the National Estuary Program and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know no further debate on the bill.
If there is no further debate, the question is on passage of the bill. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1472 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 1472, an act to rename the Homestead National Monument of America near Beatrice, Nebraska as the Homestead National Historical Park.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 12 noon Friday, January 1st. Further, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, morning business be closed, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. Finally, following leader remarks, the Senate resume consideration of the veto message on H.R. 6395.
Without objection.
So with no further business come before the Senate, I stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow.
Observers could get a whiplash when that happens. Now just think about just a few months back. Before this election, we had elected Democrats scaring voters with irresponsible conspiracy theories that President Trump was going to somehow use his office to interfere with state elections, or that he was in cahoots with the Postal Service not to deliver ballots. Remember back after the 2016 election, the irresponsibly worded talking points was that Russia hacked our elections, leading to polls 2 years later showing that 67% of the Democrats believed falsely that Russia tampered with vote tallies in order to get Donald Trump elected. Now, Let's turn to the 2020 election just completed. Those same people are now earnestly warning of the dangers of Americans questioning certified election results. Think just for a minute. Those who supported hashtag resist after Trump's election are now lecturing others about the need for faith in elections. It's kind of disturbing to me, the chutzpah of some of the people around here. Versus what they're saying now. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senate Majority Leader.
Our nation stands at a crossroads in our months-long battle with the new coronavirus. Tracking recent developments lately has felt like watching a split-screen television. On the one hand, Operation Warp Speed has fostered a modern medical miracle. The genius of science has brought forward safe and effective vaccines at a pace which, just months ago, many claimed would be impossible. For about 9 months now, our nation has been treading water altogether. Now the road to victory is in sight. But at the same time, even as we see this hopeful sunrise on the horizon, in the here and now, we're still facing an ongoing five-alarm national crisis. The virus is surging across our country. 2 days ago, my home state of Kentucky set another bleak new record, the most Kentuckians lost in a single day of this pandemic so far. Nationwide, since the start of December, we've lost around 3,000 of our fellow Americans to this disease every single day. Meanwhile, although the American people have built our economic recovery with more speed and resilience than anyone had anticipated, we've known all along that recovering prosperity would come hand in hand with defeating the virus. Thus, millions of working families across the nation are still under terrible strain. Last week, economists thought we'd see a slight downward tick in new unemployment claims. Instead, the number shot up, logging 885,000 new claims in just 1 week. Almost 900,000 newly laid off Americans in 1 week alone. Senators on both sides know what we need to do. In the springtime, when the country needed a bridge, we passed the largest rescue package in American history on a unanimous bipartisan basis. Now what Americans need is another bridge. Fortunately, this time we do not need a bridge over an unknown and frightening future, but a bridge through the next several months while the life-saving vaccines can flow throughout our country. Frontline healthcare workers are receiving the vaccine as we speak. Yesterday, Vice President Pence, Speaker Pelosi, and I all received first doses of vaccines pursuant to pre-existing plans for the continuity of our government. These vaccines are safe. They are effective. They are our nation's path out of this hellish chapter. So the first lines of the cavalry are already arriving. We just need to help American families hold on while the reinforcements continue to pour in. More paycheck protection loans for the hardest hit businesses, more additional federal unemployment aid, more direct assistance for families, a lot more funding for K through 12 schools to reopen safely and get our kids' educations back on track. And perhaps most important of all, a huge amount of funding for vaccine distribution so that we aren't just helping Americans endure this battle, but we're helping them win the battle as fast as possible. Last night, we extended government funding for 2 additional days. The Senate and House need to finalize another rescue package containing all the policies I just named and many more. We need to finalize government funding legislation for next year, and we need to pass these measures with a big bipartisan vote and get them signed into law without further delay. We need cooperation and focus from all sides. There is a kind of gravitational pull here in Congress where, unless we are careful, any major negotiation can easily slide into an unending catalog of disagreements. Let's guard against that. The American people have already waited for more assistance longer than they could afford. In my judgment, they've waited far too long for a relief package of the same general size and scope that Senate Republicans have been proposing literally since last summer. Every one of us in the Senate and the House represent American families who simply cannot wait any longer for Congress to conclude these discussions. Every day that we delay may very well cost more small businesses their survival, cost more American workers their jobs, and yes, cost more Americans their very lives. We've had productive discussions this week. I appreciate the good faith spirit that has characterized my talks with Democratic leaders, Speaker Pelosi, Leader McCarthy, Secretary Mnuchin, but the American people cannot feed their families or pay their bills with Congress' good faith discussions. They need us to act. We need to conclude our talks, draft legislation, and land this plane.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk shall report.
Nomination, the judiciary, Thompson Michael Dietz of New Jersey, to be a judge of the United States Court of Federal Claims.
And the clerk shall call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Right this moment, there is a mad rush in America. Apple, Amazon, Facebook, dozens more. They're all betting on a radical new technology that will change the way we live. This is the future, says Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. The Wall Street Journal agrees, calling it foundational, like the internet and electricity. Investors are paying close attention because the World Economic Forum projects this technology will soar 295,762% over the next 7 years alone. More than 5G, AI, and the Internet of Things combined. That's why companies like Walmart, Visa, Dole, FedEx, Ford, GM, JP Morgan, and Shell are also involved. And a recent report from UBS found 200 of the richest families on Earth, worth an average $1.2 billion, agree this will fundamentally change the way we invest.
You can feel the electricity. It's almost like you felt in the 1990s with the internet.
In fact, in a story missed by the media, even Warren Buffett, famous for hating technology investments, has called this ingenious. And he's making a huge billion-dollar bet. If you've ever kicked yourself for missing out on history's biggest trends, like investing in Microsoft in the 80s, Amazon in the 90s, Apple in the 2000s, or even Bitcoin in 2010, this is it. A rare second chance. Because in today's special presentation, Wall Street legend Teeka Tiwari, the man who came to America with just $150 in his pockets and went on to correctly pick the last two investments of the decade, months, even years before the so-called experts, will finally reveal his best investment of the next decade. A breakthrough technology set to grow an astonishing 295,000%. In fact, Teeka has gone all in. In the last 2 years alone, he's invested millions of dollars, traveled to 14 countries, flown 300,000 miles, met with 4 different billionaires, all to get the inside track on what he calls Genesis technology.
Genesis is the one investment that will eclipse everything.
When Teeka Tiwari makes a new investment recommendation, people listen. In December 2015, for example, Teeka recommended NVIDIA. It went on to become the #1 stock of 2016. And in the last 3 years, his audited track record, spanning a few dozen different investments, returned an average yearly gain of 154%. That's 10 times better than the S&P 500 at record highs, 81 times the average investor, according to JP Morgan, and even 5 times better than the investing legends Warren Buffett, Bill Gross, and Carl Icahn all put together. Because of Teeka's rare ability to spot big winners, he was recently asked to manage $100 million, but he refused. Instead, Teeka decided to keep doing what he does best, to share his ideas with regular, everyday Americans. Already, Tika has helped give thousands of people across the world the chance to multiply their money 7, 12, 20, even as much as 140 times over, just by investing in the initial rollout of Genesis technology.
So from that $10,000, it had gone up to $330,000, and we were just amazed.
How can you ever say thank you